All right, I think we'll get started. Thank you all for being here. Can everyone see my screen? If I could just possibly get a note from someone that it's working all right. Awesome, thanks so much. All righty, so thank you all for being here, especially on a Sunday, taking time out of your day. And we're especially grateful to our guest speakers for being here. We're really looking forward to hearing from them. So just a little brief overview of the agenda for today. I'll go over a little bit of housekeeping and a land acknowledgement, and then pass it over to my co-volunteer, Nat. We'll hear from the speakers, and then we'll go through a few action items that you can all take part in. And then we'll have some closing remarks and sign off. So, might be familiar to some of you at this point in the pandemic, but I'll go over a bit of housekeeping. So please do keep your microphones muted at all times. Since we're in the webinar function, you won't be able to have your cameras on, but please do keep them muting. We are recording the webinar, so please be aware of that, and you'll receive a copy of the recording after the webinar finishes. And please feel free to submit questions at any point during the event. During the Q&A will be towards the end. Due to the limited time, our moderator will pick the most appropriate questions, so we might not get to everyone's, but we'll do our best. If you do have questions, please use the Q&A function. So that's at the bottom of your screen. I believe if you're on an iPhone or an iPad, it might be at the top of your screen. But it should be somewhere around there. If you do have trouble with the Q&A, you can put your questions in the chat. That's a good second option. I recognize that we're all joining from different territories, so it would take a very long time for me to acknowledge all of those, but I would like to recognize that I am an uninvited privileged guest on the unceded territory of the Secwepemc people, who have been here since time immemorial. Many Secwepemc people are currently defending their traditional lands against the Trans Mountain pipeline, as Canada has not respected the calls to action from the United Nations Committee on the Elimination of Racial Discrimination, which condemned Canada's treatment of Indigenous land defenders. I also want to note briefly that Red Dress Day was recently observed on May 5th, as many of you would know. And people called for action to end the violence against missing and murdered Indigenous women, girls, and Two-Spirit people. So in this context, it's important to keep in mind the connections between violence and resource extraction projects. This is also relevant in the context of today's workshop, of course, which will focus on the impacts that climate chaos is having on Turtle Island and what is now dominantly known as Canada. Indigenous peoples are the original climate defenders who have been warning us about the consequences of unsustainable practices, and colonial governments have blinded us from the reality of the destruction of the environment and the criminalization and even killing of those who defend it. So we hope that today's event will help us all to confront the realities faced by Indigenous communities around the world. And land acknowledgements are more performative and meaningless if we don't talk about how to decolonize and indigenize our spaces, institutions, and ways of being and knowing. So as we listen, learn, and take action, we're hoping to consider how these issues play out in our communities and how we can support Indigenous self-determination, sovereignty, and environmental justice, especially for privileged settlers like myself. It's our responsibility to amplify Indigenous voices. And I do just have a little link on the side there to nativeland.ca. If you're unsure about the Indigenous land that you're on, you can always consult that to get some information on the territories, treaties, and languages. It's quite an interesting tool. So I'm going to turn it over to Nat, my fellow volunteer, who will get us going on the speakers. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Annika. So we are so thrilled to have with us Chief Patrick Michel and Allison Gu. So how this format will go is I will introduce our two speakers. where I will introduce our first speaker, and then that speaker will have 10 minutes to speak, and then we'll move to our second speaker, and that will be followed by a question and answer period. So we will start with Allison Gu. So Allison is a second-generation Chinese settler who's living on the unceded and unsurrendered lands of the Musqueam, Tsleil-Waututh, and Squamish First Nations. Allison is the youngest ever Burnaby, BC city councillor, elected on the mandate of climate, racial justice, and housing. And in 2017, she cycled from Ottawa to Burnaby, and this was against the Trans Mountain Expansion Pipeline well fundraising for the legal fees of the First Nations who are fighting the project in court. We are so lucky to have you. Please go ahead. We're excited to hear from you.
Thank you so much. And I will also acknowledge that I am speaking from the unceded and ancestral lands of the Hunkaminam and Squamish-speaking peoples. Burnaby has a number of First Nations who have title to this land and who have been keepers of this land for time immemorial. So I'm joining you very gratefully as a settler and hope to always lift up those voices and honor their histories and stories. I see climate as very intrinsically linked to how we do justice to reconciliation. And maybe I'll talk about that a little bit later. But I think I was brought onto this panel for the purposes of speaking to climate from an urban perspective and what your municipal governments can do to better prepare for climate change, as well as improve resiliency for communities for the events that we know are going to be coming. So in terms of climate from an urban perspective, there are so many, and that will ultimately fall on the responsibility of cities to deal with. And from a fiscal responsibility perspective, it will be billions cheaper to mitigate climate change as much as possible than to only look at it from an adaptation lens. And all of these infrastructure impacts that we're seeing in BC, we saw flooding that took out highways, we saw heat waves, we saw wildfires. All of these are impacts that cities are ultimately on the front lines of dealing with. Beyond that argument, though, I think that there's an aspect of moral imperative and moral responsibility, with cities typically having more resources than rural areas, as well as higher populations. And on the flip side, because of the population and the resources that we do have, there's a huge amount of potential that cities can have in terms of how much impact we can produce in our actions of fighting the climate emergency. When we create complete communities, for example, it means that people aren't creating as many emissions just to get from work to home, or home to school, or school to the grocery store. And buildings use less energy when you share walls. So looking at whether we're looking at townhouses or high rises, these individual units aren't using as much energy. And they also tend to be a little bit smaller, which means that there's less air to heat and less space that we humans want to fill with stuff. And because of the sheer numbers and population of how many millions of people live within urban centers, all of this ends up being incredibly impactful. And the reason why I talk about fighting climate change first is because not only is it cheaper, but it means that we limit harm to millions and millions fewer people. And from a climate justice perspective, we know that due to geography, but more so the systems of deep, deep inequality that people have created, that climate change will disproportionately affect people living in the global south, lower and middle income countries, And even within, Turtle Island, within a more localized level, more deeply impact Indigenous communities and other communities that have been marginalized. So from that perspective, I feel that it is our responsibility too, as a relatively speaking wealthy country, as for me, a relatively speaking wealthy city and urban area, that we do our fair share of emissions reductions. When I speak of fair share, I mean beyond what we've got our targets currently. To me, fair share means that is proportionate to our historically higher emissions per capita as a wealthy country. But going into what we can actually do in the terms of resilience and adaptation, I think it's important for cities to prioritize solutions that address mitigation and adaptation simultaneously. Naturally, this is often the nature-based solutions that you might hear people talk about. And this includes increasing tree canopy, which helps to absorb water during heavy rainfall events, mitigate the impacts of heat waves and the urban heat island effect, and absorb carbon to fight climate change all at the same time. Those are the ideal solutions to me. But water drainage infrastructure is also a huge piece of it. And similar to that nature-based approach, this is looking at really permeable surface area. In cities, we've paved so many of the surfaces that exist in urban areas that looking at increasing permeable surface area is a really important aspect to increase the amount of groundwater, to limit erosion, to limit the speed of water entering our storm drainage, or the speed of water entering streams and creeks and rivers. And something that cities can do is by increasing and prioritizing bioswales and natural rain gardens, which help to improve absorption of water into the ground and slow the flow of water into storm drainage or streams and rivers, like I said earlier. Burnaby specifically, we've got a number of salmon-bearing streams and points of access to the Burnett River, which is a larger river that also has salmon within it. And these salmon are so important from a nature point of view in terms of helping, form ecosystems, form the foundations of ecosystem. But it also, from a human rights lens, it's hugely important because of how Indigenous communities value and depend on salmon for food and other purposes. So I think nature-based solutions always, I see them as the gold standard of what we can do to simultaneously adapt to, mitigate, and fight climate change. But sometimes we also need to put in resources to prepare for adaptation and resiliency, full stop. And for Burnaby, this looks like drastically increasing the number of firefighters and building 2 new fire halls because we've got TMX on our doorstep. The TMX pipeline comes and ends in Burnaby, where there's 2 tank farms. And these tank farms were not built for the amount of capacity that they'll need to hold, which means that safety standards originally meant that you had to space these tank farms out a certain distance. And now what we're doing is we're just putting tanks in between tanks and drastically increasing the risk of fire, severe fire events in the event of an earthquake or malfunction, or even if we've got a wildfire event up at Burnaby Mountain, which is TMX tank farm. One of them sits at the bottom of the mountain, and if we've got a wildfire, a human spark, or something like that coming and spreading downwards, that's going to spell really, really big trouble because of just the hundreds and thousands of gallons of flammable material that we've got. So on that same front, it also means mitigating our urban wildfire risk and looking at how we can prepare for the hotter and drier summers that we are going to have. In terms of other aspects of climate, it also means spending money to put in sewage pipes that are large enough to handle the kind of extreme rainfall we got this past November, as well as separating storm drains and septic infrastructure early on and progressively as we go. And it also means putting in money to prepare facilities to host people during heat wave events because we know that we lost so many lives through this past heat dome. Am I going over time, Nathan?
That's great. If you want to just wrap it up, that would be great. Yeah,
sure.
Thank you.
I also think that one last thing I'll say about resiliency is that I think we need to be creative about policies that may facilitate efforts to improve resiliency. And one aspect that I'm thinking of here is food security. We know that because of how climate change exacerbates drought, flooding, that it's going to have huge impacts on global food supply. And food security and more localized resiliency around food will be incredibly important. But currently, officially, the kind of zones that Burnaby allows for food growing is only in agricultural zones. So by changing that kind of zoning policy, we can look at encouraging and facilitating food security, as we know that this is going to be a huge problem in the coming years. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Alison. I'm so happy that you are a city councillor, that, I feel so inspired, and you presented so many things that, can change cities and can change how Canada is facing climate change. And it sounds like mitigation and adaptation go hand in hand. So thank you. Thank you so much for that perspective. So next up, I would like to introduce you to Chief Patrick Michel. Chief Patrick Michel is located 15 kilometers south of Lytton, BC. Chief Patrick of the Kanaka Bar Indian Band has lived in the Fraser Canyon all of his life and has worked with his community since 1978 to design and complete projects that reestablished community foundational and sustainable stability in air, water, food, and shelter, with supporting resilient systems like energy, communications, transportation, and waste. And this is for the environment and economy of today, and more importantly, for tomorrow. Chief Patrick graduated from UBC's law program in 1992 and practiced law in Lytton, BC from 1997 to 2005, when he transitioned into community roles as a liaison, economic development, and lands management until becoming chief in May of 2015. In 2018, Chief Patrick was honored with a Clean Energy BC Lifetime Achievement Award for his work in renewable energy project design, permitting, development, and operations. And in 2021, Chief Patrick was honored with the Clean 50 Lifetime Achievement Award for his work on climate change awareness and action. That is amazing. And Chief Patrick, we are so thrilled to have you here, and we're looking forward to hear what you have to say. So please, you can show yourself on the video. We're looking forward to it.
Thank you so much, Nathaniel, for those kind words. I think you forgot to add is Minister Heyman is very courageous. He's asked me to sit on something called this Climate Solutions Council. And my first words to him, he says, but I use profanity and weird analogies. But if it gets BC moving faster than it's doing right now, I accept it. I wanted to start out, and I know it's only 10 minutes, and maybe there's a lot more time that we can have some here, but at the very beginning, Annika shared together in her slide, together. I want to reiterate that climate changes, extreme weather events are affecting everyone everywhere. No one is immune. But that concept of climate justice, those who have done the least will suffer the most. For goodness sakes. So it's pretty easy then. So harm reduction, stop burning fossil fuels. Meanwhile, I'm quite certain that our emissions have gone up. So as part of harm reduction, harm reversal, transition and adaptation, what can we do to help those who are suffering directly or indirectly, but more importantly, what are the options available to us for, you know, those 4 items I mentioned: harm reduction, harm reversal, transition and adaptation. I just wanted to throw that out there, because our next event is on May 27th. I don't know how. I've got it in a Word document. I don't know how to ship it over to you guys. It'll be an open virtual event, limited seating for those people who can come here. And I just want to let you guys know that the links that I shared earlier, I'm not going to take you through what happened on June 30th. I've got 4 to 5 videos out there. That's the shortest one. That's my wife and daughter in there. It was tough. I'm not going to talk necessarily about what happened due to the atmospheric rivers, where Highway 1 was shut down in 23 locations and Highway 8 still hasn't been rebuilt. All that sort of stuff. That was tough. Not going to necessarily talk about what happened on December 27th when we're at -32, never heard of before, and 4 feet of snow when my church collapsed and some of my homes collapsed under the snow load while everybody shivered in place. A big part about Kanakabar's story is the fact is we've been getting ready for the environment of today, yesterday. So as a result, we're resilient. We're able to shelter in place. And after the extreme weather event is passed, we're able to come out and rebuild very quickly. And the thing is, does that mean we've given up on climate change? Absolutely not. My community is one of the few that have come out and quite articulately, I'd like to think, and in many different ways, said no to TMX. We said no to TMX because the risk to the ecosystems was too high. We also said no to TMX because the risks to, or sorry, if we're experiencing a global existential crisis, let's triple our fossil fuels to the market. It made no sense. So we wrote to Canada and we wrote to BC and we said no. In 2007, when UNDRIP was passed, FPIC is carried in Article 32.2. Then what happens is FPIC then became, I think Canada removed this objector status. BC made it law, Canada's made it law. And yet my free prior informed consent and $1.95 can still buy me a cup of coffee because there ain't nobody listening to FPIC. That's the current state of the law today. So how then do we fight this good fight? And it's good, it's easy, with awareness. So I just want to quickly, and mindful of the time, that I want to take you guys a little bit of chronology. How long have the First Nations been managing land and resources? We heard at the very beginning, time immemorial. My grandmother said that her grandmother told her that her grandmother told her that we lived here since forever, and that's what I'm telling my grandchildren today. Time immemorial. I don't know. Let me check my smartphone. Our history and our knowledge and our stories was handed out generation to generation. For example, everybody knows that our first contact was in 458 with the Chinese. Everybody knows that, right? Or is it because 1492 with the Spanish explorer who was working, or the Italian explorer who was working for the Spanish government? Yet we seem to disregard the Vikings that landed up on the North Coast. So we became aware as an Indigenous people of other people in the world as far back as the 400s. And we became getting ready for them. The stories that I was handed down to me was that one of the races was going to be lost and he's going to need help. I won't name that race. Take a look at who writes the history books, though. So what happened was 1858, BC became a colony. In 1858, BC became a colony. Canada was declared in 1867. BC joined Canada as a province in 1871. And Indigenous peoples were relegated to the federal government under the British North America Act, Article Section 9124. So we became wards of the state. And for the longest time, you know what happened. I'm not going to get into that dirge. But I'm inviting you guys to at least find Chief Dan George's Lament for Confederation, which he wrote and presented live on CBC in 1967. When I watched that show, and when my grandmother talked about her knowledge transfers from Chief Dan George, she said, people can see the glass is half empty or the glass is half full. His lament for Confederation ends with learn their language, learn their laws, and make the next 100 years the best in our collective nation's future. Something to that effect. So as you heard Nathaniel explain, I became a lawyer. Why? Because I could. I lived in a house without electricity, without running water, without septic, all those things. But with 17 other people, I lived in a house of love. I had air, water, food, shelter, energy, transportation, communications, and waste management. Stable. I didn't have lots, but I had enough to live and had enough to thrive. The problem was colonization introduced to us a heck of a lot of, we need more. I'm still wearing the same shoes I was wearing on June 30th. Why do I need another pair of shoes if these ones still work? So colonization, in effect, and where we're facing today is we're still combating greed. How do we convince the world that harm reduction is to stop pursuing the very thing that is killing us all? Easy. You just share. Our website is full of stories and all that sort of stuff. My community, let's go, what can I say? We did a land use plan in 2015, for example, where we assessed the impacts on the land and resources here in my territory, and it wasn't good, but we came up with a repair plan. In 2016, we came up with a community economic development plan because that's what everybody was telling we needed, but we did it only more tongue-in-cheek. 2018, we created our very first climate transition and adaptation plan. All this stuff is online. And if anybody's watched some of my videos, it's right click and steal. If you've never seen a climate assessment and transition plan, go on to Kanakavar's website, right click and steal. So what we did is we understood the risks to air, water, food, shelter, energy, transportation, communications, and waste management. When I talk about the courage of Minister Heyman, one of the presentations I did, and it's online, I'm just going to quickly go over it just to remind myself what date it was I presented to the sitting premier and all of his ministers, as well as all the chiefs of BC on November 5th of 2019. And I forecast the events that were coming on the event of horizon. I warned about extreme heat and drought and fires and flooding and freezing and snowing and wind events. And I'm not going to go into ocean level risings. That's not an extreme weather event. That is a byproduct of cumulative effects. But that's where we're at today. June 30th, the Lytton fire was the result of an extreme weather event that created heat, drought, wind that required one spark, and that spark happened. And we lost an entire town on 20 days. Still living that. You don't want this. Those who have done the least will suffer the most. I lived in Lytton because I wanted to. I love Vancouver. I love Burnaby. I love Kamloops. I love Toronto. I love Ottawa. The only problem is the last time I was in Ottawa, a sinkhole occurred, and I took that as a message that you probably shouldn't hang out in Ottawa too much. So that's for that fellow who's from Ottawa. Ian, I think it was. Let's just say I don't travel very much. Why? Because we don't need to. We can communicate effectively through social media and virtual events like this. So we should be able to share that there is a path forward for all of us. And I didn't want to get wholly into all the details, but I'm certainly going to get granular in any way, shape, or form. Amnesty International was formed in 1961. What are you doing? How are you helping people who are suffering? Directly and indirectly. When I speak about the May 27th event, our community has spent $1.6 million on our savings. We're depleting our future generation savings to unveil for the first time products that are resilient to extreme heat, wind, rain, and cold. And we're building them here at Kanakavar. These are demonstration products. So you might want to read into it, because if your house has survived a flood, extreme cold, extreme wind, and or extreme heat / wildfire, you might want to think about renovating it with some of these products that we're identifying on May 27th. The whole purpose of harm reduction, harm reversal is one side, but because of the lag time and inertia, we have to prepare for the worst. We need to be able to shelter in place and be resilient. It means pull out. On Earth Day, we unveiled our SIA, and everybody knows what SIA is, right? Allison, controlled environment agriculture. We're growing meats, our fruits and vegetables now in shipping containers. We control the heat, the moisture, the light inside shipping containers. It's not new, it's just new to BC. So it doesn't matter if Highway 1 is closed in 23 locations. It doesn't matter if Highway 5 or Highway 8 is down. I'm growing my own meats, fruits, and vegetables so that my grandparents don't suffer, so that my grandchildren don't suffer. We're producing potable water. We're producing the shelter. Now for energy, for 20 years, I walked to town. Now everybody wants an F-350. Not going to happen. You still have two legs and a heartbeat. Worked for 8,000 years, can work tomorrow too. But just part of Kanakabar's story is, with awareness, you can change your priorities and implement stuff today. If you invest today, you'll be okay tomorrow. Because what Kanakabar is saying is it's not end of life for British Columbia and Canada. What's coming is a complete change in quality of life. How do we put in cooling centers during extreme heat events? Not during the event. You need to put them in ahead of time. How do you putting on heating centers during extreme cold events? Not during the event. You need to put it. It's called proactive investment in resiliency. Easy peasy lemon squeezy. If you know what the hell if you want to know where it's being done, go onto Kanakabar's website and watch it. Watch the event on May 27th, where we introduced the 4 products. I don't know who's going to be there. Me, myself, and I signed in, but as far as I know, that's only one. Sean over here to my right is my cumulative effects coordinator. He just said, I've registered to be there in person. So you have communities like Kanakabar who are helping other people by sharing our success stories, who are helping other people by making available water and a place to sleep during an event so that people can go home. Amnesty International, how can you help directly and indirectly? Share the story. Climate change is real. No one is immune, and we're all in this together. So let's find the solutions together, but more importantly, make them happen. And that's all I got to say about that.
Thank you so much, Chief Patrick. That's powerful. And thank you for your insight, foresight, creativity and humor as well. And, I feel like many of us often don't feel like climate change is an existential threat. And sharing and awareness, as you say, is so important to realizing that and to, to finding pathways for action. So I think what we'll do now is we'll move into a Q&A period. And if you do have questions for Chief Patrick or City Councilor Allison, please post them in the Q&A. And Allison, if you could turn on your camera, that'd be wonderful. Then the 3 of us can have a conversation. So it's true, we do have a little bit of extra time this afternoon. So I thought how we could start is if either of you have anything else you'd like to add or like to respond to one another's conversation, that would be great. I can prompt a little bit more as well. So, one of our questions was, what are your lived experiences, in the roles that you're in as a chief and as a city councilor? And so, on that idea, I would like to know, how can cities and nations work together? How do you see, do you see opportunities for collaboration in this good fight against climate change?
I think I'll start off by saying this, is that my experience is you don't want to have my experience. You don't want to be in flight mode. You don't want to have your wife showing up in a dress, 3 grandchildren with no clothes on, a daughter who's 8 months pregnant in premature contractions caused by the stress. You don't want this. You can live vicariously and morbidly by watching these videos that are all over the websites and stuff like that. And I think if you need to see that, it's there for you. I'm just saying it's what I've experienced and what I'm experiencing right now. You don't want this. So that's the first thing. You don't want this. And it's preventable. So when we look at this, we're very fortunate that I was able to get my family down to Chilliwack on day 1, so that my wife on her birthday, July 1st, was able to wake up in a hotel room in Abbotsford. We're very, very fortunate that I was able to get them down there. But I stayed here and I helped people, because one of the first things that was lost on June 30th was communication. Instantaneous, no Facebook, no cell service, no nothing. So people were panicked because we became so bloody reliant on technology. Kanaka Bar has its own cell tower. We have 5 bars right here, and everybody's connected to the internet. So if the internet goes down or the cell towers go down, we have our own communications so that it never happens again. So we created what's called an emergency operations center that isn't functioning right now. But Burnaby can set aside land as an option. This is where you go to in an emergency. But these things I call resiliency centers need to be staged about every 200 kilometers so that in an extreme weather event, those people who weren't prepared have a safe place to get the right away, not some ad hoc whole bunch of people showing up, don't know how to fill out the damn form, and who are bloody sympathetic because they've been at it for 17 hours. People were streaming it in. I rode in an elevator with a man who'd never been in an elevator before from Lytton. All he had was a little metal bucket with a pair of duck shoes. That's what he got out with. And I helped him up the elevator. Oh, look at these elevators. You have to strike your card against the machine and push the floor. He's still not home. And he hasn't recovered here. He's on Vancouver Island. Over 1,200 people were evacuated that day. And I don't even know where at least 60% of them are yet. I'm not on Facebook. If I wanted to, I could track down every person who's evacuated. At that time, I'm focusing on me, my wife, my 6 kids, and my 16 grandchildren. And maybe that's selfish. But if you look what Kanaka Bar is doing, is saying, but look, we didn't have to go all the ways to Burnaby. Yes, we did. Nobody had made the proactive investments in emergency operations centers. We know now that governments are now issuing extreme heat warning sound waves. So I didn't know. I was reading a report yesterday that either 600 British Columbians or 3,500 British Columbians died from the extreme heat. How many of those people didn't have air conditioners? So when we talk about the inequity, it's really hard to pay rent in the Lower Mainland. So can you afford the electricity and the air conditioning that go with it? Where are the green spaces, the cooling centers? So there's so much more we can be doing. Like I said, when I told Minister Heyman, we know what to do, we just need to do it. The resources are there, people, time, technology, and money. What you need though is the courage to make decisions in response mode. Response mode. I'm still waiting for a building permit to put up a cafe and store to provide that first service to this community because they don't know how to speed up a building permit. So I had to submit another revised sanitary plan on Friday. For Pete's sake, people are suffering and people are dying, and you need me to dot an I and cross a T on a waste plan? I'm not about to contaminate this bloody environment. Because what we do to the land, we do to ourselves. It's just one of our sayings. So everything we've done, we've repaired our land and resources, and we're creating a safe space that's only 2.5 hours away from you, Allison. And when you pass through, you know that you'll be welcome. Down on Highway 1, peeing and pooing in potable water is free, but the cup that says you survived a conversation with the chief, that's $10, right? Environment and economy. So it's with a sense of humor. Have I given up on mitigation? No. I think we're going to take care of business. But at the same time, it's hard to believe when Chrystia Freeland can file a $7 billion change order for a pipeline, but won't send a nickel to Kanaka Bar to help with these climate change resiliency studies or the bills, or Minister Farnworth, or Premier Horgan. Every premier and sitting minister knows what we're doing at Kanaka Bar, but not one of them have helped financially. They're all following. So May 27th is just as good as saying, let's see what we're doing, but see who's there. I don't know who's in the chat room. We've created a virtual session for 200 spaces. For $20, I get another 400 spaces. So all I'm going here is that at the end of the day, climate change requires courage. Climate change requires perseverance. And we could do it together. Nobody's going to beat up my new friend Nathaniel or Allison. Why? Because that's not how it works. We face these demons on social media all the time. What do you know? If you guys look at our video, why Kanakabar said, first of all, the first thing, I posted the video in 3 minutes. Somebody said, you're too stupid to understand. What is that, a troll? So why would I put myself, my family into the social media? Because I believe I have a yellow tie on. That's called the eternal flame of optimism. I still believe in our collective tomorrow. So the one thing I keep asking people is, do you? Because if you've given up, then step down and let somebody else pick up the torch. Because damn it, our children and grandchildren are worth it, aren't they? So I probably digress from the question, but Allison, your turn.
I don't know how I follow that up. Yeah, speaking of that, I think giving up on mitigation it doesn't help anybody. It only helps the fossil fuel companies who will profit off of our lack of willingness to fight for change, because they would much rather a world where we don't care if a pipeline is built. We don't care if governments are using $22 billion of taxpayer money to build a climate destroying pipeline. They would much rather that, because it would make their jobs much easier. So we absolutely cannot lose hope in the mitigation fight, because every degree of warming matters. Every fraction of a degree matters, because every fraction of a degree means millions and millions and millions of people suffering less or suffering more. And like the chief said, we cannot let the challenges that we face of political apathy and a lack of political courage allow us to stop fighting. Because the more we push, the more we fight, the more we work together collectively to bring people together and force our politicians to do something, that is what will win the fight against climate change. It's when politicians don't have a choice and they feel that it's their jobs on the line, or they act. And that is, I think, one of the things that you can do in fighting climate change, in playing a role, and to put your bodies on the line, put your privilege on the line, wherever you have it, especially in the context of fighting these resource extraction projects, which are so often conveniently centered on Indigenous land. And so often it's Indigenous land defenders who are getting just brutalized by police because they're trying to protect generations in the future and protect the lands like they've done for time immemorial. So we as settlers need to be showing up, working in solidarity with them, letting them lead and following their lead. I absolutely agree with all of the chief's comments, and I hope that nobody loses hope, because we can't afford to.
Thank you both so much for your courage, and for your testimonials, and for thinking about these reflections in solidarity and how we might let others lead and support them. One question came up in the chat, and I think it leads well from what we were speaking about, and it's about creativity. What does that look like in regards to climate change? At a municipal government level, from a nation's perspective, from the federal government, and from the spaces where they interact as well. And how can creativity lead to solutions, in regard to mitigation?
I'll try to take the lead here again. So the question was creativity. We have a saying here, it's Kanakabar. It ain't innovative to do things that work. Now let's use an example. We have 15 operating solar projects, right? Our community cooling and heating center is powered by the sun with battery. So when the grid goes down, the people in their homes have a safe place to go to 24/7, 365. The access is by a code, okay? The thing is, solar power has been around. We sent people to the moon with solar power. I don't exactly know. when the technology was first identified in the late 1800s, right? The concept, it was Albert Einstein that actually matched the thought to the thing. The point is solar's being around. If I go to Allison's office, first thing I look for is how many solar projects do they have? 1, I have 15. If I go to any one of your towns, how many wind towers do you have? I have 5, right? How many hydro projects do you have? So here, if you can generate the electricity you need for your street lamps, you can generate the electricity you need to power your home if the grid goes down for a short period of time. But you also have the resources. Welcome to BC, where 8,000 years ago, Indigenous people said, oh, look, there's land, there's wind, there's water, there's sun. So the original people who determined renewable energy was the Indigenous peoples, and we harnessed the land and resources without extraction and without exploitation, and we lived fine. It's not innovative to stop chasing the bottom line. All of Kanakabar's economic development advances at forecasted break-even point. If we make a profit, we're embarrassed. But the rest of the world looks at the Fraser Canyon and says, welcome to the Fraser Canyon, where you're guaranteed negative return on investment. So is it creative then to look at your business cases differently? To invest in social impact rather than corporate impact? When are we going to throw our wallet out the window? So the concept of creativity, it isn't creative to use stuff that works. For example, it's $10 million to put a solar manufacturing plant anywhere in BC, including Burnaby, Allison. The problem is, how come we don't manufacture solar panels in BC or Canada? Something nefarious there as far as I'm concerned. We can manufacture, creating jobs in manufacturing and in storage and in transportation and installation. San Diego has, as one city alone, has 400 solar installers. How many exist in BC? 3? 4? Why? Because for some reason, solar's not taking off. Electric vehicle manufacturing, not in BC. Electric vehicle conversion, not in BC. So what do? We drive our diesel-powered public transit buses. We run around little things. But I heard there's an e-bike now. I don't know if Allison has approved the e-bike lane in Burnaby, because I don't get to Burnaby very often. I don't travel very much. But now that I know Allison is there, I'm sure I could take a left-hand turn at Willingdon or something like that. I don't know where your situation is, but I love Burnaby. Just, you know, I used to play baseball up near Central Park. Creativity. Don't hide behind that word. Innovation. Don't hide behind that word. Greta said it already. You know what to do. You just need to do it. With the word maybe is courage. Again, going back to what I said, together we'll do this. And because that's how you get rid of the angry minority. Nobody drove around here in their F-350s with their upside Canadian flags saying wah, wah, wah about masks and pokes, right? But I saw that in Ottawa, weeks and weeks and weeks of protest. But as soon as I say, I'm jumped. Look at that fellow from Tsleil-Waututh Nation, 28 days. 28 days for defending his land, his resources, his children and grandchildren. But man, if you got a Canadian, you got an F-350, now that pissed me off. You do not hang my flag upside down off a Terry Bloody Fox. But how can you take that on? The problem with Indigenous people in Canada, we're really small demographically. But what happens when the majority then protests? We just let them get away with it? So I realize that I'm digressing in that part. But you know what? If people are marching on the bridge for climate change and they're slowing down traffic, there's a reason. Because they're trying to, they're asking for action. Minister Heyman, what have you done? You've released 2 report cards, but our GHG emissions have gone up. Something's not resonating there, right? I was asked to speak at UBC, and I finally made a trip, and I took a diesel-powered bus out to UBC, and it broke my heart. Low-hanging fruit like electrifying our public transportation system still not done. Why? So how are British Columbians and Canadians going to believe in our collective future when low-hanging fruit hasn't even been done? Burnaby, your water has to go uphill. I hope you have enough water. Have you got enough water plan? You got the GVRD. Where are you in a priority if the reservoirs don't fill up? Kanakabar has 7 creeks with year-round water. We're building storage for when the water is needed for the droughts. I can't transport water up to the north or south of me, but it'll always be ensured that at Kanakabar, there will be water for those people who need it. 2 liters per day. The system that we found was being built in Comox Valley and rolled out across China and Central America. It's affordable. It lasts 100 years. It's powered by a bloody solar project, right? And it's run by 12-year-olds with a smartphone. That means that chief may actually be able to run a potable. It's 2/3 the cost of an average treatment plant, and it doesn't involve chlorine. So I've invited Clear Flow Systems out of Comox to be here on May 27th, because that's what we're putting on Highway 1. If you can get here, free potable water. If you forgot the container, I'll probably sell it to you. But you know what? Take your Dasani, take your Aquafina, which is now bottled in Vancouver. Because you guys ever remember, where do we used to get potable water from? It used to all say Toronto tap water. But we're only bottling bottled water. So now gas is now more expensive than a bottle of water, or is it? Now that would be an interesting analysis. Anyway, creativity. Just do it. Let's deal with Nike.
Thank you, Chief. I'll just add one thing. I think, what you said rings so true, and it's about low-hanging fruits and having the courage to pursue those avenues. And I think that, Allison, that you do have that courage, and everything that you've mentioned here in your 10 minutes that you spoke, there were lots of nature-based solutions that you mentioned. And so what form then does creativity maybe take? Is it, getting through to upper levels of government? Is that what it might look like? I just wanted to prompt you. Thank you.
I think creativity for me, in the context that I'm thinking about, is a very, municipal focus. Municipalities, we are very governed by the province, and there are a lot of restrictions that we can or cannot do because the province just simply doesn't allow us to, and no municipality wants to challenge that authority, because it means a lot of more complex things, because we rely on the province for a lot of things like money and a lot of help and resources. So where municipalities need to be a bit more creative is to push that boundary as much as possible and look for solutions within what is known as our traditional authority. And jurisdiction is a colonial government nightmare. And it means that governments at all levels work in silos. When our problems are very intersectional, our problems related to climate, we need to tackle them and look at how they relate to housing and affordability and justice. And our governments are not created in a way that is able to respond in a flexible and adaptive way to those problems. So I think when I speak of creativity, I absolutely agree with the chief in that, especially at other levels of government, federal and provincial levels of government, we just need courage, political courage to say yes, to regulate corporations, to stop, to tax them, to stop pipelines, to stop bailing out fossil fuel companies. At the municipal level, we are restricted in many ways, and part of that is the silos, and part of that is the lack of jurisdiction or power that we have to do certain things. So when I speak of creativity, I speak in that very localized sense of how can Burnaby really push the envelope to do more and go beyond what we're currently doing.
Thank you. I think that then brings us back to a few comments in the chat. What can be done in the jurisdiction that you're in. And I think people in the chat have been interested in, or excuse me, in the Q&A have been interested in food security and transportation. There's been some questions on those lines. And, you know, what changes can be made, you know, from your nation's perspective, Chief Patrick, or, you know, from the city of Burnaby to food security and to transportation, and what is the current state of that?
I'll start with food security. So I've just placed a link to the 2019 warnings. Minister Letnick was very honest that BC has become 80% dependent on food imports. That was years ago. You want to dig it up, look at under Minister Agriculture. We're all aware that BC is becoming a net importer of foods. So if California burns, there goes the strawberries, the raspberries, the lemons, the limes, whatever. Food security. How do we ensure that there is choice that's affordable for all British Columbians? Easy. Grow your own. But what's the barrier? We sit down and we look at the flooding that occurred in Abbotsford last year. We saw huge blueberry fields flooded, and it broke my heart. It really did. But is that all we grow in BC's? Blueberries? Damn things got crisped during the heat event anyway. So how do we motivate or incentivize an agricultural industry to grow the things that provide the foods we need to live? Transportation. Let's use an example. 2 or 3 days ago, there's an article written about why BC and Canada won't make the switch to electric trains. When Greta left COP25, she took an electric train home. But here, show me, do we even have electric trains that shunt? We go down and we look at Highway 17, it goes over the road. Those are diesel trains pushing those cars back and forth. How do we work with the corporation CP and CNR to at least switch their shunt trains to electric? How do we electrify our transportation system? Electric monorails work. Everybody knows that no one wants a mass electric transit between Hope and the Lower Mainland, right? Why do I have to drive my fossil fuel car always down and pay $50 for parking when I could at least have some sort of electric option from Hope to Vancouver, a form of mass transportation, running 24/7, 365, powered by the wind, by the sun, by water, with battery storage. So if there's an extreme weather event, your diesel-powered buses that can't get down Scott Road, or I don't know, it's just trying to think of some steep road in Burnaby. Now, Allison, the only reason why I'm picking on you is because you said you're from Burnaby. Everybody else are just names. So I like picking on people. We can't afford the transportation. I had begged Minister Ralston when he, and I'm seriously when I use the word beg, Minister Ralston, I will never be able to afford an electric vehicle. Can we at least motivate and incentivize electric vehicle conversion? And I'll paraphrase, Tesla shall supply. So in the same thing that affects our food, our transportation industry seems to be dependent on the good graciousness and wills of others. If we do not manufacture the things we need to have a quality of life or a life, we will suffer. Very earlier on, I said what's coming for BC is a complete change in quality of life. And I agree. We won't be able to afford grapes, but at Kanaka Bar, we're growing our own grapes. So why do I care about scarcity and food price? If my roads are closed, I'll still be able to walk all throughout my traditional territory. That's how we did it for years. So the question then here is, people with F-350s are bitchy about $2.20 a liter, and I don't give a rat's ass because I'm walking anyway. So if I was in the city and there was public transportation that was electrical, I would appreciate it. So what I'm just saying is, from a food and from a transportation, if we don't break the dependency on third parties, it's gonna get rougher, a lot rougher than it has been in the last 10 months. I don't need fuel here at Kanaka Bar because we can walk, but you tell it to anybody else who says, but I need fuel. So, and at the same time, you tell me one person who's 16 can afford insurance, huh? I'm just saying, I'm just taking a little shot at Minister Ebby there. I think that was his baby. Those youngsters, they need to pay $10,000 to drive per month, let alone the fuel costs. Yeah, so transportation is really, really critical. Replace it with virtual. Do we need to have another conference in Vancouver? Allison and I may never ever meet in person, but we could have many, many conversations through this new means. And there's very little GHGs involved with the virtual meeting. So find ways to end your needs to travel. But if you are going to pay travel, then you're be prepared. For example, if you want to go to Disneyland, you're mad that it's $300 a ticket. Let's see how pissed off you are when it's $3,000 because of the fuel surcharges. But the only thing I want from my government is, if you're going to charge us carbon taxes, for fuck's sakes, put it on climate change initiatives, not pipelines. So I digress. Sorry, and I dropped the F-bomb. I almost made it to the whole session.
No, Chief Patrick, I think you've really swayed the audience. There's someone in the chat who would like for you to run for Prime Minister, so just keep that in mind. But Allison, if you have comments on transportation and food security in Burnaby, or a response to Chief Patrick, that would be great.
Yeah, I mean, I think Chief Patrick covered most of it. I think on transportation, again, everything I'm saying is from a municipal lens. But in terms of transportation from a local level, again, like I said, building these complete communities where people don't have to depend on a car to get to the grocery store or to get to the library or to get to school. And if they do need to get somewhere, that they have safe infrastructure for them to travel by bike or to walk. A lot of people, because of how we've designed our cities, because they center cars, people don't feel safe getting on a bike. And I commute by e-bike, and I think it's the greatest thing ever. It's fast. I don't ever get stuck in traffic, but a lot of people don't feel safe, and we need to build that infrastructure and deprioritize the car. I think the car has just fundamentally changed how we build cities. We build cities around cars rather than building cities around people. And that will hinder any public transportation goals, no matter what they are. It doesn't matter if 100% of people are driving electric cars, because there's still going to be people who are killed by cars. There's still going to be traffic. There's still going to be incredible injustices happening in the global south, where they're mining these batteries, lithium battery packs for cars. So ultimately, at the city level, especially because we are so dense, and the investment in public transportation is per capita a much more reasonable investment than if we were going longer distances for fewer people. That's why cities really need to focus on those small trips and deprioritizing the car. That includes improving public transit. And in Metro Vancouver, it's challenging because, again, public transportation is not in the hands of the city. It's in the hands of TransLink. And the BC Liberal government many years ago started privatizing TransLink. So now TransLink operates on a business model rather than something that should be a public service, and something that should be reliable, convenient, fast, and affordable. Something that is a real alternative to cars. A lot of people don't take public transit because they think that they don't have freedom to move how they want in the city, because they're waiting for a bus, or they're waiting for connections, or it takes an hour to get somewhere that would take 15 minutes by car. We need to change those ratios. We need to change that reliability. We need to improve the speed and convenience of these trips. And all of that fundamentally comes from deprioritizing cars and taking funds from, how are we taking funds from, again, the carbon tax and putting them back into climate action? How are we actually moving quickly? Because we've seen through, you can look at European cities like Denmark or European cities within European countries that have strong bicycling infrastructure, that it's because they gave away road space to cycling and they made real infrastructure changes.
Thank you. Yeah, deprioritizing cars and prioritizing people, that is so essential, as you say. And definitely, as Chief Patrick said, moving the carbon tax into climate change mitigation. So I think I'd like to take one more question from the Q&A, and then we'll maybe end talking about action. So the question in the Q&A, it's about, can we bypass the constraints of government and jurisdictions and instead look to the UN for guidance? I know, yeah, I see some laughter. And I know, Patrick, you were talking about UNDRIP and how that, hasn't really happened here. Of course, there is BLC 15, but, how, is there a way for us to make actions and not be constrained by jurisdictions? And Alison, that's, I think, a particularly hard question for you because, of course, you're representing a municipal government, but, I would love your thoughts on it as well.
All righty. So one thing about investing in your future is you break dependency. I don't need permission from Vancouver, from Victoria, from Ottawa, or anywhere else. I'm going to their hopes because I wanted to showcase to people, if it takes 18 months to 3 years to put in emergency response capital and supporting infrastructure, gee, that's a problem. One of the jokes I like to tell the sitting ministers when I get with them is you might want to issue your permit before I finish the next one. Now, for example, Alison's going to come up here. I've sent the document to Ian. She's going to show up here because she got nothing better to do on May 27th because she wants to look at this SIA. Where is the engineer's ticket? Where is the permission to use? The point is, I do everything with the most qualified people I know. And because I don't wait. So if they're saying you can't grow radishes in your shipping container, why? Because I didn't give you permission. You didn't fill out the application form and give me $15. That's how Allison pays for her stuff down here. You have to get permission from this municipality of Burnaby. Then you have to have all these inspectors come in. So and Roundabout was saying, as an Indigenous person, I can promote legal anarchy because I broke dependency. I have the people, time, technology, and money. What I don't have time for is people who don't know what the hell they're doing. That's scary. First Nations governance supersedes the British North America Act of 1867, as well as the Constitution Act of 1982. One thing that UNDRIP and DRIPA says, the state shall get the free, prior, informed consent prior to issuing land and resource uses. Okay, great. The problem is my rights and titles is constrained by the criminal code. Okay, so here's the situation. I sent a very articulate and well thought out PowerPoint letter and a video on why we said no. And this is what I got to enforce it. This is called a noodle neck and a strong finger wag, because I can't beat you up and I can't kill you. So when a First Nation said no historically, we would beat you up or then kill you. So tell me, do I have the legal right to defend my future generations from today's stupidity? And I'm trying to watch my vocabulary. If you can't do it, it's like Severin Suzuki said when she was 12, if you don't know how to fix it, quit breaking it. We've done, so in one of my presentations, I've often said it, it's a quote from everybody else. What we did in ignorance, we've doubled with full knowing what we've done since 1988. We know what we're doing. We can't stop it. So do I have the right to defend my children from you? Do I have the right to defend my land and resources from you? And it's not in Constitution. It's in common law. It's in fiduciary. And I believe some of those cases are being articulated. I haven't practiced law since 2004 when I declined a judgeship. I don't think I'm going to go back there. It was a lot of work. My sole goal in life now is to finish off the capital projects that our community started and retire to raise goats for meat, cheese, and milk. So no, Prime Minister is not on the table.
Thank you.
All I'll say with that
Go
is
ahead,
that
Alison.
absolutely the first thought that came to my mind is that First Nations and Indigenous communities have the 100% right to supersede any authority that seeks to subvert their dominance over them. And that is how colonization started, was we say that you have to listen to us and our rules and our law. And that has been how colonization has succeeded. And we need to empower and support Indigenous communities to their self-governance, their rights to self-governance and sovereignty and self-determination.
Thank you both. And with that, I think we'll conclude with some brief thoughts on actions that maybe Amnesty members or the public should do, to support communities or to change government policies. Of course, you've both spoken on this, but if there's anything that you can think of now, or that you think of now, we would appreciate your thoughts. Thank you.
Just want to say here is that Amnesty International, I'm familiar with only at the highest level. Okay. But I know that whether you look at Wikipedia, you have 10 million volunteers, or somebody else is 7 million volunteers. That's a lot of voices. And you can pick and choose. For example, Kanaka Bar's projects are $8 million. So if each one of your person sent $1 to my community, that would certainly alleviate a lot of stress. But this isn't a fundraising campaign by me. I'm just saying here, the village of Lytton, who lost their town. How can you raise money for the village of Lytton? They have a donation part over lytton.ca. So you could. You know what one of the problems with being a husband, a father, and a grandfather is, and I'd like to think I'm one of the best one of them, is I don't know how to ask for help. That takes real courage. I'm suffering. So is my family, and so is my community, and so is my region. How do we ask for help? Because one of the problems with being stoic and stupid is it does have a picture of me beside it. How do people who are suffering ask for help when for 8,000 years, those who helped themselves lived? We also need to break dependency. But Amnesty International, you also probably have somebody who works for Oxfam, and probably Oxfam and Amnesty International get together with UNICEF. For crikey's sake, I've been yakking away at Al Gore Foundation the last couple of days. Maybe they'll show up, maybe they'll watch that event. Arnold Schwarzenegger's team is also following it. But you know what? That's just people following the event because they need to see this information. To have a chance, we need to know our options and our alternatives. And that's what our May 27th event is. If you want to have a chance, you need to know and just like I've always said, if you continue to build with straw and stick, don't come crying to Kanaka Bar when your house or your system that supports your house burns, blows away, freezes, or floods away. And for God's sake, quit building in floodplains.
I just want to thank everybody for attending, and to Chief Mitchell for sharing all of his incredible insight, and for the leadership that we need to see at every level and in every community. I hope that folks will feel empowered after hearing Chief Mitchell's comments to help push your government leaders to do more to stop building fossil fuel infrastructure and to reduce and eliminate our dependence on fossil fuels for the rights of humans around the world. Thank you.
Wonderful. And on behalf of Amnesty, we are so honored that you both are here. Your brilliance and everything you've said and shown us is so much appreciated. And we know you're busy, so thank you for taking the time out of your schedules, out of your Sunday. It has been so amazing to have you here. And with that, I will turn it over to Annika, who will close.
Thank you so much to both of our speakers. That was absolutely incredible, so important, so impactful. Thank you. And thank you to Nat for moderating so well. Oh, sorry, I have not started the presentation. I was so blown away, I couldn't get things going. So I will be a lot more underwhelming, but I did want to just mention a few actions that you can take from Amnesty's end of things. So before I get into that, just a bit of something that we wanted to mention that's already mostly been mentioned, but just that this is not abstract, as we've heard plenty during the speakers' presentations, that we still, like as we speak, we have flooding going on also in the Northwest Territories and Hay River, in Manitoba, states of emergency, other provinces as well. And as we've heard, Canada is continuing to financially support pipelines, including the Trans Mountain Coastal Gas Link. And this is all as the United Nations Secretary General said, quote, that investing in new fossil fuel infrastructure is moral and economic madness, end quote. Yeah, those are just a few thoughts to keep in mind. So if you do want to learn more from Amnesty's resources, we have a policy briefing. The links for all of these will be posted in the chat. So the policy briefing that is linked near the top there, a web page and a blog post, and a couple of e-actions or petitions that we wanted to highlight. One calling on Canada to stop funding fossil fuels, which as we know is very essential, and another petition calling on Canada to respect Wet'suwet'en title and rights. So and those will also be distributed in the follow-up email that you'll receive with the recording in a few days. So if you could take those actions, we would appreciate it, and especially to focus on the actions that our amazing speakers mentioned, because what they have said is absolutely key. It's great that this is recorded. We can all return and hear the wonderful words again. So I'm just going to, briefly turn it over to Tara Skur, who's going to give us a few closing remarks kindly. So thank you, Tara.
Oh, sure. Thank you. Thank you, Annika. And yeah, just echoing what everyone has said to our incredible guests today. And we learned a lot. We learned, that we have to have the vision to deal with climate change up front. We heard people reiterate the truth that we have to stop burning fossil fuels. At Amnesty, we say you can have climate justice or you can have fossil fuels, but you can no longer have both. We also learned that we have a moral imperative and responsibility to confront climate change and to help one another out. And that we know that the mental and emotional toll on people who have lost their homes and who have been harmed and who are facing harms is huge. And so we need to have the courage to create a future that we want. And I think this is the first time on an Amnesty event that we've ever heard anyone say anarchy breaks dependency. And I think that we all agree with that. And I'm really glad, Chief Mitchell, that you said that. because that's what we're seeing in action from your community and from others who aren't dependent, who are breaking the chains of colonialism and dependency and finding their ways forward. And I think we need to take hope and courage and inspiration from communities like yours. At Amnesty, we also are very clear that climate justice is racial justice. And as our speakers have said and others have mentioned in the comments, that those that cause the least amount of climate harm are the ones that are most disproportionately affected by climate change. And so to ensure that there is also racial justice when we're talking about climate and how we mitigate and adapt to climate change. And so some of the things that some of our speakers talked about were ensuring that we're not dependent on an outside force like a corporation to be generous or to solve the problems for us, but also to make sure that how we design and plan cities and communities allows people to have shade, food security, access to clean transportation, and all of the things that make cities and towns and areas pleasant places to live. So, you know, we can't give up. We all have to take the moral imperative and the moral responsibility, as Allison said, to stand up to fossil fuel companies and to fight for a climate future that is just. And we have to support each other in the face of the lack of political courage that we're seeing. So to wrap up, I guess I would just like to say that my wish is that each of your communities is safe this year, that you're connected. Each of you are connected to at least one effort to protect and strengthen your community in the face of climate change, and that you find hope and courage in your hearts to join Allison, Chief Mitchell, and others to fight for our collective futures. And that's what we're trying to do at Amnesty, is support with a national campaign on fossil fuels to end fossil fuels and fossil fuel investment in Canada. And we'll be sending out an email with the recording, with the links that Annika mentioned, and other things that people can do, as well as some of the things that our speakers spoke about today. We'll make sure the links are there, the information for May 27th, so that we can support innovation and anarchy that breaks dependency. So thank you very much, everybody. And I hope you have a good afternoon. I'll turn it back to Annika and Nathaniel. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Tara. So I just wanted to bring up a couple more things. Here are some links that will also be in the chat that you can sign up for the Climate Justice and Corporate Accountability newsletter. Visit Amnesty's website, and there's an email address there as well. So thank you again to our amazing guests. And thank you to everyone who was involved in organizing, and many thanks to all of the attendees who took time out of your day to join us here. I know I am inspired, and I hope everyone else is as well. As you heard, you'll receive the recording and some links. So thank you again, and I hope the rest of your day for all of you goes well. Thanks again.